one of the last remaining strongholds for Arctic grayling in the lower 48, one of the three forks to the Missouri River and the headwaters of the Missouri River. The Big Hole has been known for many years as a special place for Montana fly fishing, and in recent years we've heard about some of the declines in brown trout populations. Today we have one of the key players who is working to find a solution to these changes, and after this episode you will have a clear understanding of what it will take to turn this around. This is the Wet Fly Swing Podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Brian Wheeler, Executive Director of the Big Hole River Foundation, is going to take us into all the issues around the Big Hole River and trout populations. You're going to find out why and how water quality is the key here and what we can do to get things changed. We also find out why he submitted a petition to the state of Montana to get this stream listed for protection and what the bugs can tell us about water quality in a river. Plus, we're going to hear about his love for boating and boating the canyons and this epic over 200-mile Grand Canyon trip he did with his wife. We get that story today as well. Here we go. Man doing some of the hard work out there, Brian Wheeler from bhrf.org. How you doing, Brian?
Good, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for doing this today. This is going to be a good chat. I've heard a lot about you guys over the years. We've done some episodes on the Big Hole. Right now, we're currently doing an episode in a series on the Missouri because we're heading out there fishing this fall in October with on DeMark Lodge, and we're pretty excited for that because I think we're going to get some good dry fly action and get into all that. But today, I wanted to really talk about some of the things that you're working on with the Big Hole River Foundation. And but before we jump into that, maybe take us back a little bit. I'm not even sure if you do any angling or fly fishing or anything. But first off, are you into any of that? And then also we can talk about kind of your conservation background.
Sure. I mean, short answer is yes. That's why I moved to Montana and Colorado previous to that, and East Tennessee previous to that. I grew up in Northeast Ohio, where opportunities were pretty limited. So I kind of chased that around in the 20s, early 30s part of my life, and I've been a guide for about 20 years. I actually know Craig and have worked with him on the Big Hole. Yeah. So,
oh, wow.
So the connections run fairly deep. My experience as a whitewater and fishing guide has me pretty tuned into river conservation issues. And essentially I've more or less shifted over the past 20 years towards making a full year living from that to kind of part-time guiding, maybe 40 days a year. And then full-time with the Big Hole River Foundation, working on conservation issues, focused on water quality.
Right. Wow. So are you still doing some guiding now?
Yeah, about 40 days a year or so. And gives me a chance to chat with folks that come from all over and kind of clue them into the work we're doing and raise a bit of money and, yeah, just kind of enlighten people to what's going on here. And maybe, if we're lucky, a lesson or two that they can take back to their home watersheds.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea to actually be out there guiding because you're bringing people in from around the country to hear about your issues, right? They're coming to fish, but then they learn more about the Big Hole, and no better place than the executive director, right, to hear some of the issues firsthand.
Yeah, and no better place for a captive audience than sitting in a raft.
That's right. Nice. Well, I think we're going to definitely talk about some fly fishing and your guiding, as well today, but I want to talk about, maybe just some of the things you're working on. We've heard some things around over the last couple of years about some pretty, I'm not sure, impacts from changes. And I'm not sure if it's like populations, aquatic, invertebrates, things like that. But maybe give us an update. What are you working on? What's keeping you busy out there?
So in my role with the foundation, I mean, everything is focused on our water quality monitoring program. We built a project to address a pretty significant data gap, i.e. nobody else was monitoring water quality in the Big Hole. So we identified that gap and was like, okay, how do we build a project to address this? And then how do we make it credible? How do we ensure its scientific validity? And we can chat about that later. But basically in 2019, we built that program. Ironically, one of the goals of that monitoring project was to prove the pristine nature of this headwater stream to the Missouri. Big Hole's pretty well known, the last refuge of the Arctic grayling, headwater of the Missouri. And we've said, well, this is a pristine place. Let's see how good it is. Let's prove that it's so good that it deserves outstanding resource water designation. as an extra layer of protection. And funny enough, as we started building out the sampling program, we discovered that, wow, we wouldn't qualify for this. Actually, we have a chronic nutrient pollution problem. So it was interesting. And as, in my opinion, as science should be conducted, you got a hypothesis and you just kind of go with what the data shows, not what you want to be true.
Yeah. So that's it. So that's interesting. So you guys get into this with the idea that you want to just get the data and show how pristine this is, but you learn there's some issues. And when did the maybe talk about the fish population, because I think that hit some of the headlines. Wasn't there some stuff going on where there's some fish numbers were going down? Talk about that a little bit.
Basically, for about the last 7 or 10 years, we've kind of been on a downward trend in the Big Hole, along with the sections of the other rivers that comprise the Jefferson watershed. So you got the Big Hole, Beaverhead, Ruby. They all flow together, form the Jefferson, one of the three forks of the Missouri. That's not to say that every section of those rivers were impacted, or at least, severely. The Big Hole's definitely got the most press, good, bad, and ugly. And I think at the end of the day, the important thing for people to remember is that this is the data from FWP, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and their biologists. It's not folks in the conservation world that are, making these claims. It's the fisheries biologists have told us this is what's happening. So we essentially dropped in 2023 to historic lows of populations, especially of the brown trout. We were well below the 25th percentile for average historic populations. And nobody really knew why that was. We did see an improvement last year, which was good. But, as far as data goes for fish populations, it's kind of on a 3-year cycle. You collect the data, but you don't really know how a generation of fish does until around 2 or 3 years later, when they're sizable enough that the biologists can conduct their electroshocking surveys. So there's always a little bit of a delay there in figuring out how the juvenile recruitment was for a particular year. So we're all waiting here with bated breath this year when they do their shocking in the spring to kind of see how we're doing. Are we continuing to slowly improve like we saw last year? We're still well below historic average, but there was some potential good news in last year's shocking reports. So, that's really kind of where we stand with regard to fish populations. That's what I know.
It's an interesting conversation because it's probably not too dissimilar to steelhead in some ways, where we've had these big drastic changes in closures and you're sitting there at some point. I mean, that's different because obviously these fish are heading out to the ocean and there's all this stuff, but you're thinking like, whoa, what is going on? And nobody can quite figure out what's going on. It sounds like this is the same thing and it's not just the Big Hole. It's you said the other three, the Beaverhead and the other ones there. So it's this maybe more regional or, watersheds area. What do you think is the big contributor? Do you guys have some guesstimates on, some theories on what's going on here?
Theory is the right word, because at this point we don't have the data to say for sure on any of this. As far as the populations go, not really. I can say that in discussions with folks from FWP, with our data, and with other groups that are collecting data to kind of bolster what we've collected, especially dissolved oxygen levels. My gut says that this is sort of a cumulative thing from chronic environmental stress that essentially, causes negative impacts on physiology. It makes them more susceptible to disease. It negatively impacts respiration, growth rates, reproduction. There was a time in there where a lot of local folks and a lot of fish biologists as well kind of thought there had to be this X factor, right? To explain all this, there's got to be some pathogen that we're not aware of. So, the past few years, we've gone out of our way as anglers and guides, and even with clients, sitting in one spot trying to keep a sick fish alive so that the FWP staff can get out to the river, meet us, and do a live tissue sample because that's what they needed, right? And that's turned up nothing, at least against known known pathogen panels. So what we learned from them is basically they have no idea on that front. However, they'll continue pulling at those threads. They've got some really good histopathologists working on, okay, this didn't show up anything, against our known pathogen panel, but if we continue to look at these tissue samples and maybe find abnormalities, we can let those dictate where we look next. So, as with everything, it sometimes feels glacial in its pace, and that's frustrating to folks. And I get that. But that's science, right? That's how you have to unravel the mystery.
It takes time, and then when you look back on it, it gets clear, right? The hindsight.
Yeah.
So dissolved oxygen, water quality. Sounds like maybe those are the big things. Are there also, probably some changes in climate, right? Temperatures, things like that. But is the water quality? It sounds like that's the big thing that's really affecting maybe, and there probably are some human influences out there affecting water quality.
Well, first of all, climate is the elephant in the room. The data are unmistakable in the timing of our runoffs, trending earlier and earlier and earlier, less snowpack, more precipitation as rain, and less of that snowpack, which slow rolls your runoff. Last year, I think our peak flow in the Big Hole came April 15th. That's nuts.
Is that early?
Yeah. Yeah. This is a Rocky Mountain headwater stream. Runoff is typically June. We didn't have a runoff this year. We got that early flush. And that's sort of been the trend here recently where, later in the summer, we've really struggled with low flows, hot water temperatures. So, you simply can't escape a changing climate as a driving factor in all this. That said, that feels a little overwhelming, right?
Yeah,
but
it does.
That said, there are factors that we do have an influence on individually or locally, and human input. We're lucky in the Big Hole. We're very undeveloped. There's a lot of connected habitat, for ungulate migration, and there's a lot of mountain ranges and just rural frontier type undeveloped areas. And the entirety of the upper Big Hole is like that. But, all human land use has an impact on its surrounding environment, right? So cattle operations have an input for nitrogen and phosphorus. Certainly developing and faster growing parts of Montana is having a huge impact. You look over in Gallatin County near Bozeman, and the Gallatin River is having its own issues with this from effluent from Big Sky and that sort of unchecked development. So we're lucky in the sense that it's been much slower to reach here, but we're still having sort of the data show these impacts of human influence. One of our sample sites is the absolute headwaters of the Big Hole, and we've never come close to nitrogen and phosphorus thresholds at that site, at the headwaters. And so it really kind of drives home the point that, in that natural state, there's natural inputs, weathering of rock, atmospheric deposition, soils, things like that. They have an input. What we're seeing is what you call eutrophication, right? It's a human influenced excess of nutrients in the river. And with that comes, algae blooms. And with algae blooms, you get negative impacts on the recreational beneficial use. You get negative impact on bug life. And then, of course, when algae is not conducting photosynthesis at night, and when it dies and is consumed by bacteria, you're getting crashing levels of dissolved oxygen, which affects the bugs that trout eat and the trout themselves. So it's sort of like this chain reaction that is made worse, that's exacerbated by, higher water temperatures, lower flows, all these things that are bigger picture issues facing far more of especially the Northern Rockies than just the Big Hole. But yeah, it's certainly a combination of things. What we're trying to figure out at the foundation is how can we use quality data approved by the state of Montana? How can we use that to sort of compel a bit better accountability on behalf of these watersheds and resources? And that's sort of what we're working towards.
Gotcha. That's it. So you're getting the kind of the baseline data, so there on the water quality, right? And then you can over time see if you're able to make changes, right? Maybe if you try to fix something or adjust? Or obviously, you've got the changes in climate and warmer or whatever's going on, but there are some other things that you might be able to change in the long term, right? But you got to base it on data, and that's what you guys are going for right now, just collecting that baseline.
Yeah, and we've done it for 6 years if you include our pilot project. And so the last five have, the project itself, our methodology, our results, everything about the program has been approved by the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. That's significant. That makes the results credible. It means you can be assured that the results aren't skewed. And as a result, 5 straight years of the same issues, it's like, okay, we got an issue and we got limited resources. I'm the only employee
Oh
for the
wow, yeah, you're it.
foundation. So, whether it's writing a grant or a newsletter or doing a public presentation or doing the field work itself or all the admin work. If you send us a donation and get a thank you letter, that's coming from me. So it's a lot, but we recognize the value of it and the importance of it. And hopefully, big picture, the goal is to build a model that can be applied to rivers elsewhere. I mean, like I said, these issues are being faced all over, and concerned anglers are wondering, okay, what can I support to help protect the resources I care about, my local trout stream, cold water fisheries? What can I do at an individual level? It's like, well, if we're able to build a model that's scalable to need, whether you're a volunteer organization or you got a full staff, we can share that with anyone and everyone. Say, hey, go figure out what your state requirements are for water quality, build a program to collect the data accordingly, and then, hold them accountable for ensuring clean water for all the beneficial uses, which go far beyond just recreation and trout fishing, right? It's drinking water, it's irrigation, it's aquatic life. So our surface waters, our rivers have to be able to support all of those uses.
Yeah, definitely. Have you seen I mean, especially since you're guiding out there over the last 6 years, have you noticed it just in the fishing? Are you seeing like changes in size or numbers of fish?
So I've definitely paid a closer attention in the last 6 years since I've started with the foundation. While I'm out there, I don't got as many days as I used to, but 40 is still a lot. And my wife and I float a lot too for fun, especially in the early season before it gets busy. And one of the very interesting and concerning to me things that we've seen with some of these sick fish that have shown up with the head necrosis is that we're seeing them early in the year in June. Certainly we've had lower water than normal in June, but not every year has been like that. Even good snowpack and good water years have still seen some of those fish. And it's odd to me because that's, the rainbows are done spawning. You got plenty of cold water in the river. It's not hot yet. Flows are typically good. So you got kind of great conditions for aquatic life. And to see some of these fish during that time is just, it doesn't make sense. So at least to me, and hopefully, the biologist can flesh out some of that stuff that I'm not qualified to do. But certainly observation, anecdote from folks that spend a lot of time on the river. It's like, okay, we're seeing this, it's not rare and we've not been able to figure it out. And we've not been able to figure out why it's that early. I do want to say, like, there's a certain amount of this that is pretty natural in trout streams, especially in the fall. Rainbows kind of got it easy because they spawn in the spring when water's cold. There's plenty of it. There's not a lot of additional environmental stress on them. However, the brown trout kind of drew the short straw physiologically by spawning in the fall because they have to deal with a stressful hot summer of low flows and hot water temperatures leading up to their spawn. So they're really, they're stressed to the max in October.
What is their spawn? What is their peak spawning?
Yeah, October. Sometimes we see reds forming in September. Sometimes it'll linger through, parts of November, but, it's predominantly considered to be the month of October. And, you talked earlier about, closures for steelhead. Well, in response to some of these historic low fish populations, they implemented an October 1st closure on the big hole too, to protect those spawning brown trout. So, you expect to a degree some of that stress, that physiological stress from the act of spawning to result in fungus. That's pretty common. I look back through my emails and I saw, for the last like 11 or 12 years, I've been sending pictures of that to our fisheries biologist here. And that surprised me because I thought it was more recent. But some of that saprolegnia fungus it's a manifestation of that stress and tough environmental conditions that they're trying to spawn in. So there's a degree of mortality that happens naturally because of that, not just here, but everywhere. It's really hard on the fish. But to see that kind of fungal skin issue, it's hard to even describe it, really. The head necrosis on whitefish and trout it's odd. And it's not to say that it's not to say half the fish have it. I mean, the most recent report that came out from FWP was that, their sampling turned up like 3 fish out of several thousand that they sampled with that head necrosis. So it's not rampant. However, I think that report may have been a little bit glossy because they didn't sample when we've been seeing that problem.
Oh, right.
So, take that with a grain of salt, take it as you will, but the issue's clear. Trout populations have declined. Fishing's still good. Turns out when there's fewer fish, they can get bigger. But when you look at the long term and you look at the viability of these resources and the businesses that rely on the health of them for their existence and their sustainability, we got to start getting serious about the long-term vision here and not so concerned with, oh, we lost a little business this year. We don't want to help participate in these efforts. It's like, look, we need to be, honest with ourselves, good, bad, or ugly. We need to know what's going on so that we can address it. Until we can define it, we can't chart a path forward to address it. And so, if you want that business that, for example, that a fly fishing business or a tangentially related business, hotels, cabins, bars, restaurants, all those things that really rely on that tourism business, we got to start thinking long term for viability and not just that sort of short term vision for this year or maybe next year.
Yeah, the long term. What you're saying is there's businesses out there that are thinking, hey, we got to keep this on the down low because the more you talk about it, the more we're losing people that could be out here. So what you're saying is that we got to get it out there because that's the only way we're going to solve this problem.
I mean, more or less, yeah. Some of the efforts to talk about this have been less than well received. And that's unfortunate. I mean, I get it. I get the concern and I'm sympathetic to it, certainly. I make part of my living still guiding as well. Like, why would I want this shut down?
Right. But that's why, because it, at a certain point, you've got to do drastic changes, right? If you don't get to, I mean, you can't let the species keep going down, right? You can't let it, because eventually, they could be gone, right? That would be a potential if you did nothing.
Yeah. I mean, sadly, that's sort of true. I mean, you're seeing some of these other places struggling with, warming temperatures and sort of this migration of smallmouth bass up into zones that were not previously smallmouth zones. So this is a broad scale issue. The big hole has gotten a lot of attention for it. Some of it has been well done and some of it has been sensational and not really helpful to the conversation. But at the end of the day, fishing guides and ranchers, we're neighbors in this Southwest Montana zone, and we all depend on the health of that resource to make a living. So we got to kind of turn that critical lens on ourselves, right? And figure out where it is that we can have a positive net impact on the health of the resource that sustains us. And then sometimes that's going to be a little bit painful economically and otherwise. But if we don't, long-term viability comes into question. And we got good biologists here. And part of what I want to do with our data collection project is empower our fisheries biologists to do the best job they possibly can. And they can't manage fisheries if we don't address water quality. And so from the state, we want to see multiple agencies get together at the same table and talk about water quantity, water quality, and then biology, and pull in the same direction and kind of reduce that tendency to work in silos where nobody's talking to each other.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. So hopefully this effort can kind of compel some of that. And, I think the data are clear. We've got issues that we can address. We've got issues that are legally enforceable. And in fact, we took that data set that we've built over the last 5 years and we filed a petition with the Department of Environmental Quality about 2 weeks ago to compel them to review the data and make an impairment designation decision for nutrient pollution.
Oh, wow.
And maybe that sounds scary to some folks, but at the end of the day, it's actually a really good thing because, and we've even asked our fisheries biologists, is this a good thing for you? Is it helpful? Is it harmful? Is it irrelevant? And with the designation, there's concrete steps that the state has to take to identify and address the problem. They have to work with landowners to reduce inputs. They have to kind of create a plan. We can't just rubber stamp a new development because that may have a worsening impact on water quality that's already impaired. So there's a lot of helpful things about that impairment designation, not least of which it opens up a pot of money available, grant funding for our fisheries biologists to do riparian enhancement, fish habitat enhancement, flow enhancement. So it may seem like a scary thing, like, oh, we don't want to say this river's impaired. Well, we got to be honest about it. It is. By the data, it is. But the good thing is there are steps that must be taken by the state to address it once that happens. And there's a lot of good work that can happen as a result. There are other groups besides us working in the area.
Who are some of those other groups that are out there?
So we've got a Montana Trout Unlimited, who I have a long-running relationship with, going back to running our local chapter here in Dillon. They've got a Jefferson watershed coordinator based here in Dillon. He works a lot on the Jefferson, but he works on all forks of the Jefferson, the Big Hole, the Beaverhead, the Ruby. We've got the Big Hole Watershed Committee, where our focus at the foundation is data collection and advocacy because of what the data show. Their focus is restoration work. So we're very hopeful that with an impairment designation opening up some of these coffers, that our data can help inform and prioritize the restoration work that they're good at doing and provide additional funding for it. And then there's a lot of individuals, frankly, that are just good stewards. We've got one of our board members is a younger rancher in Melrose, right on the Big Hole, who is a great example of natural grass management, using cows. He has an intact riparian area on his creek that flows directly into the Big Hole that's multiple degrees colder entering the Big Hole. All those little things add up and they all matter, especially when, you're concerned about low flows. At this point, we need more flow, but there's not a legal mechanism to get it. A lot of groups are working on voluntary putback from irrigators. A lot of folks are working on leasing in-stream rights. Trout Unlimited has done that. And then, there's other groups, even out-of-state groups like the Western Rivers Conservancy, that are buying ranches at market value with a water right and designating that water right for in-stream use. So there's a lot of folks working on the flow angle. Is it enough? There's those that would say it's not. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people working on it. And so our little niche, our avenue that nobody else is working on, is water quality. So if we can kind of bring all those things together, hopefully we can kind of redefine the paradigm of resource management and really have it be data centric, have it be preventative in nature. If we show multiple years of high nitrogen and phosphorus levels, well, it's no surprise that somewhere down the line, we're going to have an algae bloom. We don't have to wait for that algae bloom to happen to start fixing these things.
Yeah, you can start to predict some of this.
Yeah, you can be preventative in nature, which Montana's Constitution says that we should be doing.
Right, it does. Yeah, we should be.
Yeah, I don't want to get caught in the doom and gloom loop because there's a lot of good work happening here, a lot. But, we also got to be just plain frank and honest with ourselves and be like, okay, good, bad, or ugly, we need to know. And regardless of what it says, we use the data to help guide the next steps. and just ensure that this resource is healthy and viable for all the people that depend on it, including the aquatic life.
Yeah. No, it sounds like you guys have a plan. I mean, it sounds like, especially with the other groups you mentioned, that together, being able to do the restoration and the monitoring and, a TU and everybody involved definitely sounds like, that's a cool thing. And then you're taking some action with the petition and to get the state to move on some of this stuff, right? I think it sounds like you're on the right track. It's just a matter of, like you said, it's going to take time. None of these things, it took us a short time to get here, you know what I mean? So it's going to take some time to get back out of it.
Totally.
But what would be like for people listening now, there's people all over the country, even all over the world listening, but what could they do to help, or what would you want them to take away with this conversation?
I have some of these presentations for especially fishing groups. Sometimes I'll go out to a lodge and talk to the guests that week and different things like that. And they ask the same question, what can I do? It seems overwhelming, right? And at the end of the day, what I usually tell people is like, figure out what you care about in your zone and then seek out the groups that are working towards that end in your zone and support them. If you care about the Big Hole, the Jefferson, Southwest Montana, the Missouri, it's all interconnected, right? These watersheds are all interconnected. So problems at the top will likely flow downstream, right? So
Yep.
If you care about any of those zones, you seek out the groups that are working there and support them as a volunteer, support them financially. I mean, we don't operate from many grants. So this hit to the federal grant system hasn't really taken a big toll on us. Most of our funding, thankfully, I never thought I'd say that, but thankfully comes from, individuals and small family foundations and things like that. But look for the groups that are going to take a hit over these next few years with regard to their funding and see if you can help fill that gap. See where there's volunteer opportunities. I mean, some of this stuff is so easy, Dave, right? Like we talk about it all the time. As an angler, you treat the fish with respect, you gentle handle them, keep them wet, reduce these fish pouring glory shots over a hard boat. Like it's really simple stuff. The rubber mesh net, don't keep them out of the water. Don't touch them with dry hands. Like all these little bitty things. Pick up trash when you're on the river. Don't leave trash when you're on the river. I mean, it's just so simple, and there's folks that are doing it and there's folks that aren't. And I think, a lot of those things can have a cumulative positive impact, not only on fish health itself, but just generally the environment that we recreate in, right?
Yeah, makes sense. What is if you look at, you mentioned at the start, the Big Hole, if you look at the entire system all the way to the Missouri, are they, maybe start there, like talk about where its location is to the Missouri, and then are some of these effects being felt downstream below in the tailwater stuff way downriver?
Yeah, so the Big Hole is the longest of the three forks of the Jefferson, and then down at Three Forks, Montana on I-90, there is essentially where the Madison, Gallatin, Jefferson form the Missouri. And then it goes through a series of impoundments, dams, and then of course down by Wolf Creek is the famous tailwater that you're going to go fish this fall with Craig below Holter Dam. I suspect that that's happening all the way down. If it's happening at the headwaters, I suspect it's happening all the way down. But I can only say suspect because, to my knowledge, there's nobody collecting specifically water quality data regularly. Maybe somebody does for a specific project that they're working on, but the uniqueness of our project is that it's annual, right? We're identifying trends over time, not one and done for a specific project. So I would like to see, and we'll be personally working towards, expanding our Big Hole model and applying it first to the Jefferson Basin as a whole. I've already sketched up a potential growth plan for applying our model for water quality and bugs. We also collect bugs annually, and we try and determine how is water quality affecting bug life, because bug life is a proxy for overall ecosystem health and fish health.
Right.
So I'm trying to figure out, in fact, I'm meeting with the fisheries biologist tomorrow to discuss that expansion to the Beaverhead, the Ruby, and the Jefferson. And my hope would be that others take up the mantle. They see that effort and that drive to fill a data gap and use quality data to demand better health for our resources and accountability on behalf of the state. And and take up the mantle of that and call me and say, how do I do this on my own zone, my own watershed, and be happy to help. I mean, that's the idea for me that I would like to see is like, okay, this isn't happening everywhere. In our little corner of Southwest Montana, we're building it. We want to expand it. And then we want others to take note and run with it. Do it on your own, in your own watershed that you care about. And let's catalog the health of our rivers. Because I think for so long, everything about water quality and cold water and fisheries has just been taken for granted. Like, it's Montana, right? It's pristine. It's
Right. It'll never change.
But if we don't collect the data, we don't actually know if that's true.
Yeah.
And if you don't know whether or not that's true, then you can't build a plan to address it if it's not, or you can't build a plan to protect it if it is. So, at its most fundamental level, as unsexy as, data collection for water quality is, it's fundamentally important. Everything else kind of builds on that. And it doesn't hurt, Dave, that there's, these legal thresholds, these numeric thresholds that exist. So
yeah, that's what they're there for, right? That's why we have those.
Exactly. It's real simple. Here's the threshold. If your data results show that you're above it, well, over time, you can expect that you're going to have some negative impacts from that. So
yeah, over time, then it won't be as much of a surprise, right? That's the thing. It seems like it's kind of a slow creep on a lot of these things where something's going on, you don't quite know it, and then all of a sudden you turn around and you're like, oh my God, we're in this place where the fish are going away. But what you're saying is, yeah, if you're collecting the data, you can better predict, at least know what's going on. What are the water quality samples? What does that look like for you guys? Is this where you just go around to a set of places regularly, or how do you do that?
Yeah. So, when we first built the pilot project, we had to first figure out, okay, where are we going to sample? What are we going to sample for? And how often are we going to do it? So we kind of threw together a plan. The big hole's over 150 miles long. So it's a lot to cover. When
Wow.
I go collect water samples, it takes me 2.5 days to collect and pack and ship and do paperwork, 3 days really. And I'm driving like 450 miles every time. And we do that between April and October, 9 different times. So what we built was, first we had 8 sites. We had 6 on the big hole proper, the main stem, and then we had 2 on the primary tributaries, Wise River and Deep Creek. And then our first year, we were like, holy cow, there's like really high nutrient levels in the upper river. This is a surprise. And so the second year, when we got it approved by the state, we built a couple extra sites in. I had to raise some extra money and say, look, we want to narrow down where this is. So we added a headwaters site, and we added the North Fork of the Big Hole, which is a third primary by volume tributary. And so that's where we stand. We got 10 total sites, 7 main stem, 3 prime tributaries covering 150 miles of river from source to mouth near Twin Bridges. For bugs, we do it, in the fall. And it fluctuates, but I got about 6 sites. We do 4 replicates in each riffle at each of those sites. And then we send those off to an entomology lab. We partner with the River Continuum Concepts in Manhattan, Montana. And they do the bug analysis for us. And then we commission them to write a huge report. So it covers a massive swath of Southwest Montana. It's a lot of windshield time. We take bottle samples for nitrite, suspended sediment, nitrogen, phosphorus, soluble reactive phosphorus. And then I got a fancy handheld probe that I can take pH, water temperature, dissolved oxygen, turbidity, specific conductance. All those results, it takes me like 2 weeks in January to put all that together, put it into the format required, and then submit it to the state water quality portal. That's what makes it official, right?
Right.
So, and then because we were like, man, we were seeing some crazy stuff with dissolved oxygen during the middle of the day, like, holy cow, like all this plant life, all this algae is acting like lungs. It's literally inflating during the day while it's doing photosynthesis and creating 150% saturation of dissolved oxygen. Well, if I'm seeing that in the middle of the day, I'm assuming, rightly so, that at night that's crashing. So we were like, well, it's a 150-mile round trip for me to go take a dissolved oxygen reading from Dylan. And so we raised some extra money and we got continuous data loggers that I put in the river at a couple sites. And I take a reading every 15 minutes for July, August, September, and the first week of October. So it's thousands
Wow.
and thousands of readings of temperature, water temperature, and dissolved oxygen so that we're able to graph how much it's climbing during the day and how much it's crashing at night. Well, turns
God,
out
that's great.
beyond those numeric thresholds for nitrogen and phosphorus, there's also one for aquatic life for dissolved oxygen. So if we're getting below these levels of 5 milligrams per liter, well, that's problematic. We're failing to achieve. And if it's below 8 milligrams per liter, that's rough on juvenile fish. That could be having an impact on recruitment.
Right. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing low levels?
Yeah.
What does that look like throughout the day or throughout that period?
Well, the lowest level of the day is almost always kind of right before dawn. And the highest level would be kind of, mid-afternoon at the heat of the day. And then we track every 15 minutes what they call the diurnal fluctuation. How high is it getting? How low is it getting? And I mean, long answer short, we're dropping well below 5 milligrams per liter at times. And that is a known negative impact on aquatic life, bugs and fish. Fish can move. If you get hot temperatures, low dissolved oxygen levels, they disappear. They can quickly move out of that zone, drop down into the canyon, get cold water refugia. They can move up into the tributaries. Well, the bugs aren't so lucky. They don't move that fast. So they're just, in a hot pot with low dissolved oxygen levels. And we've seen that with our bug sampling. We're seeing it's not massive, but it's statistically relevant shift in these aquatic communities where some of these sites that are having these problems, especially up by Wisdom, by Mud Creek, even Jackson, way high up, which is kind of surprising to us, but also down like by Twin Bridges at the bottom, we're seeing fewer, as a dominant percentage of species in each sample, we're seeing fewer mayflies, stoneflies, caddisflies, and we're seeing more of the pollution tolerant species of midges, more worms, more non-insects. So it's interesting because the biology is reflecting what we're seeing in water quality. And to me, it's like, guys, this is so obvious. Like, let's get on it. Everything's pointing to an issue that's pretty low tech to address. So let's get on it. It's gonna take some resources. It's gonna take some admitting, what's the first problem, right? You got to admit there's a problem.
Yeah. What is that? What is it? Let's just say we kind of have those numbers. What would be a step you could do or people could do to reduce the impacts to those water quality? Like, are there human things we can do?
I mean, some of the work that's being done is helpful in terms of enhancing the riparian buffer zone, right? So erosion is not only a problem for sediment, but it acts like a filtration system. If you got a healthy riparian zone of native grasses, deep-rooted grasses, willows, things like that, not only are you getting good shade, which can make a meaningful decrease in water temperature, 1-2 degrees, when you're getting close to 70, that's significant. But I mean, that riparian buffer zone is everything as far as a low tech thing. It's like sending all that land based flush off of nutrient loads and cow poop and things like that. It filters it out. It sucks it up and it uses it to its own advantage to grow. And it keeps it from getting in the river where we don't want it. Things like off-site watering of cattle, a lot of that's taking place. I'd like to see more of it, but it takes money, and with an impairment designation, that should open up funds to help landowners do this, where if we could keep cows off the stream bank, not only are they not crapping in the water, there's also less erosion on the stream bank, healthier riparian zones, but it takes money to create an off-site water source for those cows.
Wow.
So I'm hopeful that if DEQ takes our petition seriously, they've got 60 days to respond, that we will get an impairment designation, we'll get access to more money for groups that are doing that work, and then we'll identify some of those zones where we can make the biggest difference, the most bang for your buck. Like, where are we having the biggest problems? And let's focus resources there to pull cows off the river, to do habitat projects to improve the stream bank, and then offsite watering to keep some of that stuff flushing off the landscape from entering the river. And let's start there. And then it's up to DEQ, they'll be charged with figuring out a plan going forward to address this, long term. And I'm counting on them to do it. They're charged with maintaining water quality for Montanans. And so I'm going to keep, gently throwing that elbow in there, nudging them to do that.
That's what they do. That's amazing. That was well said. I think we can kind of take it out of here real quick in a sec here with our kind of our trip shout out segment. And today this is presented by, we mentioned before, on DeMark Lodge. We're heading over to the Missouri, and it's going to be pretty awesome because we're excited to do some dry fly fishing, but also we're doing a giveaway event, which is going on, essentially right now as we speak. So we'll put a link to the show notes to that for somebody that can get a chance to enter that, wetflyswing.com/giveaway. And we're going to be talking more about this trip. So first off, I want to give that shout out to On DeMark. As you were talking there, I was thinking about the beavers. I've heard some of these stories about where they've brought back beavers, and I think a lot of farmers were like, "Oh, we don't want the beavers because they flood our property." But what they're finding is the benefits actually to the adjacent land that they're using for farming has actually been huge. So do you think there's some of those things where right now people around in your area aren't realizing the positive benefits of what this could do? If, you know what I mean? I think probably a lot of people are thinking about taking away their rights to do things, but are you seeing the other side of it too?
I mean, with regard to beavers, yeah, there's a lot of work happening, largely led by the Big Hole Watershed Committee to implement these beaver dam analogs, because historic trapping has driven a lot of beaver from the landscape, and also the nuisance factor for irrigators and their ditches and canals, and just landowners not wanting them around. Well, we didn't realize historically, as we were taking them off the landscape, how valuable they were. And so there are some groups working on coaxing them back to the landscape by essentially, pretending that they're there with these beaver dam analogs. We're taking the benefits of them in the high country on tributaries, holding back the snowpack, they call it, holding back some of those flows. It saturates the ground, you get bigger meadow areas, and that groundwater is connected. So while it may be another small source, it is a source. And it's, in some places, it's quantifiable that you're getting some groundwater return from these beaver dam analogs, holding back some of that water, letting it saturate the ground. And then through groundwater connectivity, it's entering back into the tributaries and back into, I don't know if it makes it all the way to the main stem, probably not at this point, but maybe with time. But it's certainly having an impact on tributaries and upland landscapes. And there's a beaver working group in Montana. So yeah, I don't know how widespread the knowledge of the value of that is, but there are folks here working on it and working hard at it.
That's good to hear. Yeah, I think those are all great points, and I think we're making that point today is that there's a lot of things we can do. You've talked about a few of them. Anything else you want to highlight before we head out of here today? We haven't talked a ton about the fishing. Maybe we could save that for the next one. But yeah, anything else with your organization you want to check in on here?
I do want to maybe make a note to the fishing, just because,
yeah,
I make a partial living on it too. So I'm sensitive to the concern that folks with businesses dependent on the fishing are worried. At the end of the day, fishing's still been good. I mean, I'm out there a lot too. And just because these problems
you can still catch brown trout.
Exactly.
I think I saw something where there was I think like a 16-pound, maybe was the biggest fish caught in recent years, 16-pound brown trout on the Big Hole. So there's still some big fish out there, it sounds like.
There are some, yeah, and hopefully, we're really looking forward to FWP's electroshocking results coming up this spring to see where we stand, because maybe things are continuing to improve. Maybe we're building on last year's better juvenile recruitment. None of that means that we give up what we're doing, but it's good news. So, there's a lot of families and friends of mine that make their living doing this, and so come out and support them. Support the local business. Like that refrain is said everywhere, right? On all podcasts,
yeah.
Like all these little businesses are dependent on your, coming out to stay, go out and drink and eat, and, shuttle service and guide services and fly shop retail. I mean, it's so important.
Yeah.
They've documented the economic importance of outdoor recreation in a lot of places, Beaverhead County being one of them. And it's critical.
Oh, yeah.
But let's do it smartly. Let's seek out folks that are working towards these ends, working towards the benefit of the resource that sustains them. And let's seek out groups doing that work, and let's put our money where our mouth is, essentially. You use that purchase power to reflect our ideals, so what we care about.
Yep, perfect. Well, and I got one random one before we get out here. I know you have some experience on some river trips. Do you still have any river trips you haven't done yet that are like some epic things you've been thinking about doing?
So I've been real lucky in my life. I've been able to do those 5-day Smith trips like a whole bunch,
Oh, wow.
like
Yeah.
35 times as a guide, and got married on the third day of a 5-day Smith trip. I've been able to do the Middle Fork of the Salmon for 8 days. In 2023, my wife and I had our own raft and did the entirety of the Grand Canyon, 281 miles.
Oh, wow, you did solo.
Yeah. So I've been extremely fortunate in my life to be able to experience some of those places. I got a few others on my list. One that's sort of up there is, well, two. I want to continue the next wilderness stretch on the main stem of the Salmon, put in where we took out from the Middle Fork, and do the next 80 or 100 miles, whatever it is, down to Riggins, so that I will have done, 100, 200 miles on that. Then the other one that's less about whitewater and more about scenery and geology is I really want to do the Yampa. Beyond that, I'd love to do the Middle Fork of the Salmon again. That was just spectacular and challenging and really, really fun technical rowing, which I enjoy.
That's great. What was when you did the Grand Canyon with your wife, what was the boat you guys took down there?
We had an 18-foot Sotar. We rented one.
Sotar. Oh, you rented one.
Yeah, my 13-foot guide raft would not have done it for us in 23 days worth of gear and beer.
No, that's right. Yeah, you got to go big. That's the thing. You got to have. And then, did you guys see many of the wooden drift boat dories on the river?
We did not. We did. We were basically the whole month of April. We launched on April 6th, and we didn't see a pile of groups. It was a really wonderful time to have drawn. The temperatures were great. We basically watched spring unfold over 280 miles in 23 days until, the last like 2 weeks of the trip was like everything was in bloom. It was incredible. We were lucky to be on the river. Luck might be in quotation marks, but we were lucky to be on the river for the high flow event that happened, where they use that cold water discharge to push back the invasive smallmouth bass back down into Lake Mead. So that was scary and fun all at the same time,
So it raged. So it came up on you guys and you had some big flows.
Yeah, I don't know, 25,000 CFS, something like that.
Oh, wow. What was that when you started? Like how low and how high did it get?
I think it was 14 when we started. It was higher than normal for that time of year. They've struggled. Lake Powell has struggled. That's no secret to anyone, but we were just really, really lucky. When we went to they debrief you at the beginning, the ranger does, and is like, well, you're going to have some high flows this trip. And we all just kind of looked at each other wide eyed, like, wow, we weren't expecting that. We were prepared for a low flow trip, and wow, big flows are big time scary and big time awesome. And it was shocking how small an 18-foot raft can feel.
Yeah. And the big rod had 25,000. Wow.
Or more. I mean, by the time we got down 200 miles in, it was a lot higher than that, with all the creeks and inflows and stuff like that. So
that's so cool. Yeah. We did a little series. We did a drift boat series on the podcast, and I interviewed a bunch of guests around companies, and one of them was we had Pete McBride he had Martin's boat, and they talked a lot about the dory and the history of Linton, right, and all that stuff. And really interesting, right? This guy that was all about talk about protection. This is like that was his whole thing, to protect the Grand Canyon from development of all these, and they stopped some of the dams, and they built their wood boats. All had names of the places they were protecting, and you know what I mean? Like, that's a good story of, like, I feel like when you get into these things, we're having these conversations, they do sound like a downer a little bit, but I feel like when you look at Martin Linton, those stories you could see, like, or even some of these other places around the country of successes. I feel like, do you still stay positive when you it's going to be a battle, but you can get there because other people have done things like this?
I do, real quick to the point of the drift boats, although we didn't see any, after having done it, now I want to go do it in a drift boat, in a dory, and challenge myself further to run really clean lines.
Right.
So that's maybe on the list as well.
There you go. Well, maybe we'll stay in touch and put something like that together.
But yeah, to your point, Yeah, at times it's hard to be optimistic. It's hard to stay positive. But at the end of the day, it's like, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? That classic phrase. And simply the work needs done, and somebody's got to do it. And yeah, it's frustrating. And yeah, sometimes it's hurtful, frankly, that folks don't want to support those efforts or are outright antagonistic towards them. But at the end of the day, you just got to shed that skin and keep pursuing the direction that you know is the right one. And if you're fighting for water quality, you're fighting for ecological integrity, and you're fighting for, having a reduced negative impact on the resources that we depend on. I mean, you're on the right team. You're moving in the right direction. Be thoughtful about it. Be reflective about it. Be humble about it. But at the end of the day, seek those like minds out and pull in the same direction, because, one person can't do it. Even if one person's the face of it or gets the credit for something, I guarantee it's not one person that did all of it. So,
Yeah.
get pulling in the same direction, because the time is now, and we need to get on this as outdoor recreationalists and as people that care about it and people that make money off the resource too. I mean, we owe a debt to those resources. They've provided for us and our families, and we owe a debt to their health.
Yeah, I think and that's well said. I think I heard this other person, I don't have the quote exactly, but paraphrasing it was like, the hard work is the stuff where the work you're doing now, you're not going to see in your lifetime.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's actually, you're doing the work that you're probably your kids or maybe your kids' kids will see the benefits. That's like where the real, whatever that is, right? The real power comes where you're doing that sort of work. Because I mean, that's the case. Some of the stuff you're doing now with this water quality, it might take years to get to that point where you're like, wow, realizing what you did made a difference, right?
I sure hope so. And there's a quote along those lines that I really like. I can't remember the exact quote or who said it, but it's something along the lines of, the wise man plants a tree he knows he'll never sit in the shade of. And that's sort of the thought, is that we're playing the long game here, right? We're making sure that generations beyond me still can enjoy these kind of resources. And sometimes that means it's a little painful while you're living in it. But like I said, the work's got to be done. It's important. And, we just got to do it. That's all there is to it.
That's awesome. Well, we'll put some links to the show notes to some of the groups we talked about, and I'll get that Martin's Boat video from Pete McBride and the episode we did with him in there as well, so people can take out. But awesome, Brian. Well, this has been great. Appreciate you for spending the extra time here to dig into this, and we'll send everybody out to bhrf.org if they want to connect and help support what you have going. But yeah, man, appreciate all your time today and looking forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, I'm really glad you reached out. I love talking about this stuff, and hopefully the broader reach of your podcast will kind of clue people into what's happening.
If you get a chance, please check in with your local foundation, conservation group, whoever is in your area. If you don't know who they are, look them up, find them out. They might be local, they might be more regional, but there will be a group out there. Check in with them, and that's how you can give your support, as Brian said. Also, check in with Brian if you get a chance. Let him know you heard this podcast, and let him know you support the work they're doing. A couple of notes before we get out of here. We mentioned at the start the Missouri River trip. Right now, we are heading to the Big Mo this fall. Go to wetflyswing.com/Missouri right now and enter your name and email, and I'll follow up with you on details of the trip. If you're interested in hearing more, this is going to be a dry fly extravaganza. We're going to be out there boating, floating the Missouri with Craig DeMark and his crew, going to a small lodge on the river. If you're interested in dry flies, if you thought about the Missouri, if you want to get out with me and some of the Wet Fly Swing crew, now's the time. All right, one last shout out to the next episode. Jack Dennis is on next week. He's back, baby. Jack Dennis, Monday, we have him coming on the podcast, and he's going to give us a big update on what he has going. He's got a big 50-year anniversary as well that we talk about. So subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. You'll get that next episode delivered to your inbox. All right, I'm out of here. Hope you have a great morning. Hope you have a great afternoon or a fantastic evening if it's late in the evening or if it's early. And we'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.